12:05. 2. He showed up, didn't he? The God of my husband. Working as a real estate expert from home was among the most relieving changes I always looked forward to in my career. Unfortunately, the kids had tossed my laptop over the kitchen counter, and so, lately, I use my husband's desktop. He'd mounted in the corner of the dining room, since he decided to turn our study into a playroom for our twins. He had always been keen on having one for his child someday, even before we became friends. It seemed to be a thing for him. The twins, who were only a year and a half old, were enough company for me when their father was out of town, especially during the second week of each month. December, however, was my favorite month, mostly because my husband hardly stepped out of the house. Besides him being a preacher, did I fail to mention how fun he is? I couldn't wait for our kids to have the total experience. Reminiscing our trip to Kenya 2 years ago always gave me chills. I mean, I still couldn't grasp how God literally carried that jet with his hand. Sometimes it felt like a dream, and I'd have to shake myself to believe in that reality. How my husband did not panic gave me even more chills than any other thing. Because I mean, how could someone be so connected with God that fear was absolutely out of the picture? I had made a promise to myself to seek God. And after months, I began to feel he was all around me, even though most times I literally felt nothing. Well, I wouldn't exactly say it was a feeling. It was more of a knowing. My husband talked about God as though he was his old pal. And I was always get intrigued, lost in the moment, and realized later that I'd been listening to him for hours. After one of our conversations, I got so captivated that I asked my husband to let me meet God personally, so we could talk, because the reality of the things he was telling me were mind-blowing. "Tell him, he can hear you," my husband giggled. "No, please, you tell him. You're his favorite, he'll listen to you," I interjected. "Favorite?" My husband burst into fervid laughter. I was quite curious, yet this man always found it funny how I reacted whenever we had such discussions. He kissed me twice on my lips and reminded me of how much he loved me, which was very unlike him. The way he went about it, I mean. I could only wonder at that moment. I picked up one of the twins while he picked the other as we prepared to put them to sleep in their cots. The appointment. I had a pretty long night, and oh, did I have a good sleep. My husband always handled the kids at night, and so I did not have to worry too much about losing sleep, amongst other things new mothers usually stress about. I woke up with my day planned out, with the highlight of me taking time out to commune with the Holy Spirit. For obvious reasons, I was excited, and my husband would only stare at me, shaking his head with a grin. As I wiped the kitchen counter, my husband, knowing very well he'd get a reaction, deliberately spilled milk from his bowl of cereal onto the table, but I ignored him, knowing exactly what he was doing. "Hey, so today you won't mind me?" He pinched my arm, strutting towards the sink to clean his bowl. "Stop disturbing me. I have a date with God today." "Do you?" he teased, as I flicked the back of his ear. We went about our morning normally, and then carried the twins until about 9 a.m, when we finally managed to put them both to sleep. As soon as my husband excused me, I had a text from my boss to meet a client on his behalf at an eatery close by. I almost yelled, believe me. But considering that he had to rush his wife to the maternity clinic, I couldn't even be upset about my day being ruined anymore. A little after 10 a.m., I grabbed a can of Malta Guinness from the fridge, picked my handbag, and dashed to the restaurant to meet my boss's client, leaving the twins in the care of their father. I sat there for about 30 minutes, waiting, but he still had not shown up. I then took out my diary and began revising some architectural points I had made a few days before. But instead, I began to brood over the things my husband and my dad had told me about God in casual conversations. I picked my pencil from the side zipper inside my handbag and began jotting down strange but interesting things as I proceeded in having a full conversation with myself. I went ahead to place an order for some watermelon juice and savouries as I munched on, still lost in my world, laughing and engaging myself in rich banter. As a matter of fact, I had totally forgotten about the client I had to meet. I was totally gone. I hadn't even the urge to call home and to check on my folks, as I'd normally do anytime I'm out. The croissant pastry tasted heavenly that day as I continued writing, sketching and shading in the pages of my journal, unaware of precisely what I was doing. I made conversations with myself, even created jokes, and literally laughed out loud. I unconsciously jotted down things that seemed to be nonsense at the time as I kept engaging myself in rich and in-depth conversation. Gosh, I really needed that break, and I could only wonder why in the heavens I had never thought of doing this sometime, even before I had a family. The man at the table. At exactly 5 minutes after noon, I became conscious of the time, looking distinctly at my wristwatch and wondering how this client had kept me waiting for almost 2 hours. Normally, I'd be upset, but for some reason I was unusually calm until I exercised a little more patience and then gave my boss a call. He didn't answer his phone until my third attempt, and strangely, he couldn't recall asking me to meet a client. No way. What? Sir, how can't you remember? Confusion had gripped me, and I was beginning to lose my motor skills. Something was definitely not adding up somewhere, because my boss had an excellent retentive memory, and no sort of emergency could even make him forget the littlest of detail. I won't be available for the day. I'm taking my wife to the clinic. That was what he insisted on saying. I was shocked, and after a few minutes, I just decided to pay off my bill and return home. This is where it gets interesting. I lifted my left hand to prompt the waitress on my bill, and she walked briskly towards me empty-handed, which quite surprised me. You forgot my bill, I smiled at her. You lost me, madame. What bill? The waitress responded. What bill? My snack, of course, everything. Your friend already paid, ma, remember? She mumbled. Which friend? Madame, I'm confused. The one at the table with you, madame. The gentleman who just left. Gentleman? What are you saying? Madame, the one you were laughing with a while ago. He paid for your snack and the glass of water he ordered. I immediately looked to the seat opposite mine, where the young lady kept pointing at, and noticed the empty glass on the table, right before my eyes. It was so transparent that I had not noticed it the whole time. I began to freak out, but I tried as much as possible to remain calm, because the waitress was gradually getting tensed and worried about my mental stability. She seemed so sure of what she was talking about, and there was no way she was understanding that I was alone. He. What did he look like? What was he wearing? Ma, I cannot remember. I don't know why I can't remember, but I know he was here. I served him the glass of water and I received the payment myself. I was refusing to believe what was happening, right from my boss's call to what the waitress was saying, and so I decided to call the only and obvious person, my husband. The sound of his voice alone had the ability to relax my nerves. I called him twice, but he did not pick up, and I quickly put together that he might have been feeding the twins their lunch. I tried to leave, but I still couldn't move, and so I remained seated, trying to catch my breath, until half an hour when I finally managed to order a boat ride and headed home. Upon reaching my home, I sauntered through the back door and placed my bag on the counter, leaning gently on it. My husband, noticing that I had walked in, ambled towards the kitchen door as he gently patted the younger twin to sleep, smiling as widely as he could. I wondered why he was so excited, and I just watched him as I prepped to spill the strangest series of events that just happened to me. He still did not utter a word until I tried to speak, when he rhetorically asked undertone. He showed up, didn't he? Who? The client? No, you know who, he smiled. Who? Wait, God? God? I exclaimed. Shh, you'll wake him up. My husband shushed me as he continued to pat the baby to sleep with smiles beaming from his face. Tears rolled down my cheeks, shivers ran down my spine, and I couldn't do anything but to sit still on the kitchen tiles in silence and in tears. His overwhelming presence surrounded me, and all I could think of was my journal. I dragged my handbag down from the counter to the floor and took out my diary, opened to the pages I wrote, sketched and shaded in, and I read everything he told me. It looked different from when I wrote them, and they made more sense now. I wasn't having a conversation with myself after all. I was speaking with the Lord. It was He. The end.